The stale air of my workshop always clung to me, a mix of ozone, old coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of reagents I hadn't properly scrubbed from my glassware. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that dared to penetrate the grimy window of my converted warehouse space. It was a good life, in its own quiet, solitary way. No one to impress, no one to disappoint. Just me and the ghosts of experiments past. My fingers, stained with a persistent indigo dye from a failed attempt at synthesizing a new pigment, traced the rim of a chipped ceramic mug. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent tune, a symphony of sirens and distant traffic that rarely reached me here. I preferred it that way. The less I heard of the world, the less it had a chance to remind me of what I'd lost. Then the insistent buzz of the ancient rotary phone on my workbench shattered the stillness. It was a relic, much like myself, and I hadn't heard it ring in months. My gut clenched. No one called this number unless they were desperate, or unless they were dredging up the past. I let it ring a few more times, the jarring sound grating on my nerves. Finally, with a sigh that felt heavier than it should, I picked it up. UserLF, I answered, my voice a rough rasp from disuse. A clipped, professional voice responded, devoid of warmth. UserLF, this is the precinct. We need you. My hand tightened around the receiver. Need me for what? I asked, my gaze drifting to a framed photograph on my desk, a younger me, smiling, standing beside a woman whose laughter I could still almost hear. That smile was long gone. A situation, the voice said, a subtle shift in tone, a hint of something I couldn't quite place. It's unusual. They're saying it's beyond our capabilities. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, beyond the capabilities of ordinary investigators. They meant beyond my capabilities, or rather beyond what I used to be capable of. And you think I'm the answer? I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. My capabilities are somewhat retired. The circumstances, UserLF, the voice pressed. They're reminiscent of the Sterling case. The name hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Sterling, the case that had broken me, one where my meticulous analysis, my cutting-edge theories, had fallen apart, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a permanent stain on my reputation. I have nothing to do with that anymore, I stated, my voice hardening. We know, but this is similar. The method, the precision, we don't know where else to turn. There was a pause, then a softer, more hesitant tone. We're at the old industrial park, Building C, the basement. I knew the place, a derelict labyrinth of forgotten factories and echoing warehouses. The old industrial park was code for a place the city preferred to forget, much like certain scientists. Give me 20 minutes, I said, already pushing myself up from my stool. My body protested, stiff and unused to sudden movement. The indigo dye on my fingers seemed to mark me, a reminder of my current, mundane failures. The drive was a blur of familiar streets that now felt alien. The city had changed, or perhaps I had simply stopped paying attention. As I pulled up to the rusting gates of the industrial park, uniformed officers were already milling about, their presence a stark contrast to the decay surrounding them. A young officer, his face pale and etched with apprehension, waved me through. UserLF, thank God, this way. He led me through a maze of crumbling brick and shattered windows, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under our boots and the distant, mournful cry of a seagull. We descended a set of metal stairs, the air growing colder, damper with each step. The scent of decay intensified, mingling with something acrid and metallic. Then we were there. The entrance to the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker. The name itself was a grim joke. It wasn't a proper morgue, not anymore. The constant, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from unseen pipes echoed in the cavernous space, a maddening, metronomic beat. Two other figures stood near a makeshift cordon. One was a seasoned detective I vaguely recognized, his face a roadmap of long nights and hard cases. The other was a younger forensics technician, meticulously bagging evidence, her movements precise and economical. They both looked up as I approached, their expressions a mixture of relief and something akin to unease. UserLF, the seasoned detective grunted, his eyes appraising me. Glad you could make it, though I admit I wasn't sure you'd respond. The circumstances are Compelling, I replied, my gaze sweeping over the scene. The fluorescent light, when it sputtered to life, illuminated a tableau that sent a shiver down my spine. This was no ordinary scene. This was something else entirely. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker, was a stale cocktail of disinfectant and something far less pleasant, something that clung to the back of my throat. It was a smell I hadn't encountered in years, a smell that had become a ghost in my memory, and now it was back, solid and suffocating. The single bare bulb overhead, a weak sentinel against the encroaching shadows, cast a sickly yellow light that did little to warm the chill seeping from the cold slab. My gaze traced the stark outlines of the room. The stainless steel gurney, the stained drain in the floor, the network of pipes overhead, each one a dark vein promising to weep condensation. Compelling doesn't quite cover it, does it? The voice, gravelly and low, belonged to the lead investigator. He stood by the door, a hulking silhouette against the dim hallway light, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't moved since I'd arrived, a silent, watchful presence. I didn't answer immediately. My eyes were drawn back to the sheet-draped form on the gurney. The preliminary report had been brief, almost dismissive, but the details, or rather the lack of them, had been enough to pull me from my self-imposed exile. "How many?" I finally asked, my voice rougher than I intended. "This is the third," the investigator replied, his tone flat. "All within a week, all like this." "Like this how?" I pushed, my mind already racing, piecing together fragments of old nightmares. No trauma, no defensive wounds. The coroners were stumped. He paused, then added, his voice dropping a notch. "And the lab results are peculiar. Peculiar." That was an understatement. The preliminary report on the first victim had crossed my desk a week ago, a courtesy notification from a contact I hadn't spoken to in ages. I dismissed it then, a fluke, a strange anomaly in a sea of predictable violence. But then the second one, and now this. The pattern, if you could call it that, was too precise, too elegant. It spoke of a mind that understood the body, not just its breaking points, but its very fabric. I walked closer to the gurney, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the quiet space. The investigator remained by the door, a silent observer, giving me room. I could feel his eyes on me, a weight of expectation I hadn't felt in years. He knew who I was, or rather, who I used to be. He knew about the Thorn case. With a deep, steadying breath, I reached for the corner of the sheet. My fingers brushed against the cool, sterile fabric, a familiar sensation that sent a tremor through me. I pulled it back, slowly, deliberately. The face staring up at me was pale, serene even, as if the deceased had simply fallen asleep. The subtle discoloration around the hairline, almost imperceptible, the faint, almost artistic tracery of blue beneath the skin on the neck. It was a signature, a horrifying, impassable signature. "The Thorn case," I murmured, my voice barely audible. The investigator took a step forward. "I recognize it." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the victim. "I do, or rather I recognize the method. It was theoretical, a dead end. Something I spent months chasing only to be proven wrong. Utterly, spectacularly wrong." The memory clawed at me, sharp and unwelcome. The late nights, the stacks of research papers, the gnawing doubt that had eventually consumed me. I had been so close and yet so far, and then Thorn, the perfect crime, the one that had broken me. "Theoretical," the investigator pressed. "But I rest saying this is real." "It appears so," I answered, my voice gaining a hard edge. I ran a gloved finger along the edge of the sheet, tracing the outline of the body. The lack of any struggle, the pristine condition of the victim, the subtle, almost surgical precision of the internal effects. It was all there. The same impassable puzzle that had haunted my nightmares for years. "And I rare the one who knows best how to solve it?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. I met his gaze, my own eyes hardening. He was right. I was the only one who had ever gotten this close to understanding it, even if I hadn't been able to stop it then. I'm the only one who knows what to look for. The initial reports would have missed it. They would have called it natural causes, a rare condition. I gestured to the body. "But this isn't natural. This is artful and a confession of sorts. A confession. To the world, perhaps, or to someone specific. Whoever did this is telling us something. They're showing off." I looked around the dingy room, the dripping pipes, the flickering light. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, high-tech labs I used to inhabit. But the fundamental elements of investigation remained the same. Observation, deduction, the relentless pursuit of truth. Why now? I wondered aloud, my mind already sifting through possibilities, discarding them as quickly as they formed. After all these years. I think it's the same killer, the investigator asked, his voice laced with a new, cautious respect. I don't know, I admitted, the uncertainty a bitter pill, but the signature is too precise to be a coincidence. It's like looking at a ghost that's decided to manifest again. A ghost that wore my failures like a shroud. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the pipes. The brass wants this quiet. They want it solved yesterday. They're talking about a copycat, but if I were right, I understood the unspoken implication. If I was right, this wasn't just another case. The decision was made before I even fully processed it, a compulsion born of a desperate need for redemption, for answers. The past was a dangerous place, but it was also the only map I had to navigate this impossible present. But I'll need full access, everything, no secrets, and I'll need my own lab, whatever it takes. The investigator gave a curt nod. Consider it done. Welcome back, UserLF. Welcome back. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. This wasn't just about solving a murder. The basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker, was no longer just a crime scene. It was a reckoning. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker was thick with the smell of disinfectant, trying its best to mask something far more primal. It was a scent I knew too well, a scent that clung to my memory like grave dirt. The gurney was positioned under the sickly yellow glow of a faulty fixture, its buzzing a constant, irritating companion. On it lay the victim, or what was left of him. The sheet pulled up to his chin did little to hide the unnatural stillness, the stark white of his skin against the worn fabric. Anything. The voice belonged to a uniformed officer, his face a mask of polite detachment. He stood by the entrance, arms crossed, radiating an impatience that was almost palpable. I didn't look up. My gloved fingers traced the edge of the sheet, my mind already sifting through the visual data. The subtle bruising on the exposed neck, the faint discoloration around the fingernails. Small things, easily overlooked by less thorough eyes. Give me a minute, officer. My voice was rougher than I intended, a testament to the knot tightening in my gut. He huffed, a barely audible sound. The commissioner wants this wrapped up. Fast. The commissioner isn't the one with the microscope, I muttered, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. The latex snapped against my skin, a sharp punctuation mark in the oppressive silence. I leaned closer, my breath misting the cool air above the body. The victim's eyes were wide open, staring at the stained ceiling tiles with an expression that could have been surprise or perhaps terror. It was hard to tell when the life had been so thoroughly extinguished. The officer shifted his weight. He's a nobody. No ID, no priors. Just dead. Nobody is ever just dead, officer, I said, my gaze fixed on the subtle pallor beneath the victim's skin, a waxy sheen that spoke of something more than simple asphyxiation. It was the subtle nuances that mattered, the details that separated a clumsy homicide from something else, something deliberate. I reached for the small, portable kit I'd brought with me. It contained the tools of my old trade, the instruments that had once defined me. Now, they felt like relics, dusty reminders of a life I'd been forced to abandon. I started with the eyes, gently probing, looking for any sign of trauma, any anomaly. The faint petechial hemorrhages were there, a classic indicator, but they felt off, too uniform, too clean. This is all a bit much for a John Doe, isn't it? The officer ventured, his tone shifting from impatience to something closer to unease. He was clearly not accustomed to this level of meticulous examination for an unidentified victim. When a body tells a story, officer, I listen. I replied, my focus unwavering. I was looking for the narrative here, the thread that would unravel this whole mess. And I was starting to see a faint, disturbing pattern emerge. The way the skin was stretched taut around the victim's jaw, the almost imperceptible discoloration on the tips of his fingers, was a symphony of subtle signals playing a tune I'd heard before. I moved to the victim's hands, carefully turning them over. The nails were clean, filed almost to perfection, too perfect. No grime, no evidence of manual labor. And yet the skin beneath them was slightly abraded. A contradiction. My mind began to whir, piecing together fragments of information, discarding the obvious, clinging to the dissonant notes. "He looks like he was strangled," the officer offered, stepping closer, his curiosity finally outweighing his apprehension. "The marks are consistent with strangulation, yes," I conceded, my voice measured. "But the way it was done, there's a precision to it that suggests more than just brute force. And look at this." I pointed to a faint, almost invisible mark on the victim's inner wrist, a tiny pinprick. "This isn't from a struggle." The officer squinted. "What is it?" "That, officer, is the question." I pulled out a small vial and a sterile swab. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker seemed to grow heavier, the buzzing of the light more insistent. I carefully collected a sample from the pinprick. This was where the real work began, the work that separated the merely observant from the truly understanding. My mind drifted back, a familiar ache in my chest. This victim, this unknown man, was becoming a mirror, reflecting the specter of my own professional demise. "We found some of his belongings in a locker down at the docks," the officer said, as if sensing my internal struggle. "Maybe that'll give us a lead." "The docks," I repeated, a flicker of recognition, the smell of brine and decay, another place that held its own secrets. "Show me." He nodded, a grudging respect finally creeping into his demeanor. As I packed up my kit, I cast one last look at the victim. The stillness was profound, but beneath it, I sensed a story waiting to be told. A story that was, disturbingly, beginning to sound like one I already knew. This was more than just a murder. It was an echo. And echoes, as I knew all too well, could be deadly. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker was thick with the metallic tang of decay and something else. Something I'd tried to scrub from my memory for years. It clung to the walls, a phantom scent of failure. I'd felt it at the first scene, a whisper, but here, standing over the second victim, it was a roar. The detective had left an hour ago, his initial skepticism replaced by a grim, almost frantic, need for answers. I was still here, meticulously documenting every detail, the hum of the ancient refrigeration unit a low thrum against the persistent drip, drip, drip from the overhead pipes. This body was a mirror of the first, almost disturbingly so. Same age range, same build. The ligature marks on the neck were identical, a precise, almost surgical precision that spoke of something more than brute force. But it was the other marks, the ones that had made my stomach clench, that confirmed my worst fears. Small, deliberate punctures scattered across the torso, arranged in a pattern that felt less like random violence and more like a signature. A chilling, sickening signature. I ran a gloved finger along one of the puncture sites. Tiny, almost imperceptible. The skin hadn't been torn, it had been injected, but with what? There was no visible trauma to the surrounding tissue, no bruising, no swelling. It was as if something had been introduced directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the skin's natural defenses. My mind, despite my best efforts to keep it tethered to the present, flashed back to the old case files, the ones I'd buried deep. "This isn't random," I murmured to myself, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. The detective had been dismissive of my theories about a pattern, about a killer with a specific, almost artistic methodology. He chalked it up to my reputation, to the ghosts of my past cases. But the similarities were too stark to ignore. Two victims, two almost identical deaths, separated by only 48 hours. This was no coincidence. This was a deliberate, escalating campaign. I leaned closer, the harsh fluorescent light glinting off the victim's vacant eyes. It was the same vacant serenity I'd seen on the first victim. A hallmark of whatever this killer was doing. Was it a sedative, a paralytic, or something far more insidious, something that induced a state of calm before whatever happened next? My gaze drifted to the victim's hands. Clean, no defensive wounds. This person hadn't fought back. Either they'd been incapacitated quickly, or they'd known their attacker. But the precision of the ligature marks, the almost clinical nature of the punctures, suggested a calculated approach, not a crime of passion. I pulled out my evidence kit, the familiar weight a small comfort. I needed samples, tissue, blood, anything that might hold a clue. As I worked, my thoughts kept circling back to the old case. The pressure then had been immense. The scientific community had been watching, eager to see if I could replicate my earlier successes. And when it all fell apart, when the killer vanished and the evidence pointed to a dead end, my career had imploded. I carefully scraped a tiny sample from one of the puncture wounds, placing it in a sterile vial. The detective had been insistent on one point. The killer left no obvious trace. But every killer leaves a trace, however small, however elusive. It was my job to find it. It was my job to decipher it. The dripping of the pipe seemed to grow louder, each drop a tick of a clock counting down. I felt a knot tightening in my chest. This wasn't just about solving a murder anymore. It was about proving that I wasn't the failure everyone believed me to be. As I sealed the vial, a glint of something metallic caught my eye, nestled deep within the victim's hair, near the temple. It was too small to be jewelry, too uniform to be a random object. I carefully extracted it with tweezers. It felt manufactured. And as I turned it over in the light, I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible etching on its surface. It was a symbol, intricate and alien. A symbol I'd seen before in the periphery of my memory, a fleeting image from those long-forgotten case files. My breath hitched. This was more than a signature. This was a message. And the message was clear. The past wasn't buried. It was back, and it was more dangerous than ever. I'd felt it at the first scene, a whisper, but here, standing over the latest victim, it was a roar. The pathologist, a stoic woman whose name I could barely recall, finished her initial examination. She didn't meet my eyes. Nobody ever did when the air got this heavy. Anything new? I inquired, my voice raspy. Years of disuse and a persistent cough I couldn't shake had done a number on it. She shook her head, her gaze fixed on a spot on the victim's temple, same as the others. No external trauma, no signs of struggle. Almost peaceful if it weren't for the fact that he's dead. She gestured to a small, almost invisible puncture mark. Still the same pinpoint entry, and the internal hemorrhaging. It's like his blood just decided to give up. I leaned closer, my breath misting the cold metal of the examination table. The victim was a mid-level bureaucrat, unremarkable in every way. No enemies, no debts, no secret life that anyone had uncovered. Just another life extinguished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and that damned familiar scent. It was the smell of my failure resurrected. Back in my cluttered office, the late afternoon sun did little to dispel the gloom. Stacks of case files, both current and ancient, threatened to avalanche onto the floor. I needed to go back, not just to the recent scenes, but further back, to the cases that had broken me, the ones that had led to my reassignment. I pulled out a thick, dusty binder, its cover faded and peeling. Project Chimera, it read in stark block letters. My own handwriting, sharp and confident then, now looked like the scrawl of a stranger. Inside, the reports were meticulously detailed, the photographs stark. The victims were different then, a mix of academics, researchers, even a few prominent industrialists, but the modus operandi was chillingly familiar. The pinpoint puncture, the internal collapse, the utter lack of any discernible weapon. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the faded ink. The dates blurred, the faces of the victims a silent accusation. And when I couldn't provide the former, they'd ensured the latter. A particular file caught my eye. A young botanist, found dead in her greenhouse. The official cause was a rare fungal infection, but something had always felt off. The report mentioned an unusual residue found on her lab equipment, dismissed as contamination. I'd argued, I'd pushed, but my superiors had shut me down. They'd sided my emotional involvement, my past. I pulled out my old lab notes, cross-referencing them with the Project Chimera files. The residue. It was a complex protein compound, something I'd never encountered before. It wasn't naturally occurring, and it certainly wasn't something you'd find in a typical lab. I'd spent months trying to synthesize it, to understand its properties, but the samples were too degraded, the data incomplete. Then, a name jumped out at me from one of the old Project Chimera reports. Dr. Anya Sharma. She'd been a consultant on the project, a brilliant biochemist who'd suddenly vanished shortly after the investigation was officially closed. Her specialty: synthetic biological agents. Sharma, I remembered her. Sharp, driven, with an unnerving ability to dissect complex theories with a single, insightful question. She'd been one of the few people I'd felt I could actually talk to before everything went south. I dug deeper into the Project Chimera files, searching for any mention of Sharma's current whereabouts. Nothing. It was as if she'd evaporated. But her name kept reappearing, linked to obscure research grants, to forgotten symposia, to labs that existed only on paper. And then I found it. A single, heavily redacted document buried deep within the appendix of the Chimera report. It was a list of personnel involved in a highly classified research initiative, code-named Elysium. Sharma's name was there, along with a handful of others. And one other name, a name that made my stomach clench: Dr. Elias Thorne. Thorne, the lead researcher on Project Chimera, the man who had personally overseen my dismissal, the man who had assured me that the case was closed, that there were no further anomalies. He was still active, still publishing, still lauded as a visionary. But his recent work, it mirrored the theoretical underpinnings of my own failed research. The same pursuit of biological enhancement, the same obsession with manipulating cellular decay. A sudden, jarring realization hit me. The victims, the impossible deaths. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern I had seen before, and a pattern that was now repeating itself, closer and closer to home. The scent of failure in the basement morgue wasn't just a phantom of my past. It was the present, reasserting itself with terrifying precision. I had to find Doctor. She held the key, I was sure of it. Not just involved, but orchestrating it. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker, was a stagnant soup, thick with the scent of formaldehyde and something else, something metallic and acrid. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant reminder of the grim theater I'd found myself in again. I traced the faint discoloration on the bureaucrat's forearm, a peculiar modeling that defied conventional poisons. It wasn't the lividity, that telltale purple bloom of death. This was different, more deliberate. Anything, UserLF. The voice of the detective boomed from the doorway, a jarring intrusion into the hushed, sterile dread. He stood silhouetted against the brighter light of the corridor, his bulk filling the frame. I didn't turn. My gaze remained fixed on the victim, on the subtle, almost imperceptible clues etched into his flesh. Patience, detective. This one's a knot, a real knot. My fingers, encased in latex, hovered over the mark. It was too uniform, too precise for a natural reaction. It suggested a delivery mechanism, something injected with a steady hand. But where? No track marks, no obvious puncture wound. The detective shuffled closer, his heavy boots echoing on the linoleum. "We've run everything." Tark's screen came back clean. No trace of anything illegal, nothing even out of the ordinary. "Clean isn't always empty," I murmured, my mind already sifting through a mental Rolodex of obscure compounds, forgotten research papers, and the ghosts of my own past investigations. That acrid smell. It was tickling a memory, a faint echo from years ago, from a case that had shattered my career. A case I'd buried deep, hoping never to unearth it. I moved to the adjacent stainless steel counter, pulling out a high-powered magnifying glass. The modeling was more pronounced under magnification. Tiny, pinprick-sized lesions, almost microscopic, formed a pattern, a constellation of death. My breath hitched. This was no random act. This was scientific and terrifyingly familiar. The victim was a bureaucrat, the detective stated, as if reciting from a report. No known enemies, no motive, just gone. And how? I began, my voice low, deliberate. Did he go, detective? That's the question, not if, but how. I picked up a scalpel, the cool steel a familiar weight in my hand. I need to take a closer look. Samples, tissue scrapings. He grunted his assent, stepping back. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with the unspoken horrors of the room. The underlying tissue was strange, not the usual pallor of necrosis. It had a slightly gelatinous quality, a faint, almost iridescent sheen. Hours bled into each other. I worked methodically, meticulously, my focus narrowing to the microscopic world beneath my instruments. The acrid scent intensified as I isolated fragments of tissue. It was the smell of ozone, of something burning without flame. It was the signature of a specific, highly experimental neurotoxin, one I'd only encountered in the hushed, clandestine halls of the Phoenix Project. My hands stilled. The Phoenix Project. A ghost from my past, a project officially shut down, its research deemed too dangerous, too volatile, but clearly not entirely dismantled. This toxin, if I was right, was a product of that research, and it wasn't something you could buy on the street. It required specialized knowledge, access to controlled environments, and a deep understanding of bioengineering. The implications crashed down on me like a physical weight. The Phoenix Project wasn't just a memory, it was alive, and its remnants were being used to kill. The victims, so far, had been unremarkable, seemingly unconnected. But what if their ordinariness was the point? A blank canvas for an unseen hand. I leaned back, the cool metal of the examination table pressing against my spine. The detective was gone, leaving me alone with the deceased and the sudden horror. The Phoenix Project was about pushing boundaries, about creating life-altering substances. And if this toxin was what I suspected, it was designed to be undetectable, to leave no trace. A perfect murder weapon. But who would have access to it? Who would have the expertise to wield it? This wasn't some rogue scientist working in a hidden lab. The sophistication, the access required. It pointed to someone on the inside. Someone who had been part of the project or had inherited its secrets. An insider. My own past with the Phoenix Project, the mistakes I'd made, the lives that had been ruined. It all felt like a prelude to this. There was I being brought back to clean up a mess I had inadvertently helped create. I looked down at the martled arm again, the faint, iridescent sheen catching the flickering light. The pattern wasn't random. It was a signature, and it was a signature that screamed of the Phoenix Project. The knot wasn't just in the victim's flesh. It was in the very fabric of the scientific community, and I was caught in its tightening coils. This was no longer just about solving murders, and I knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in my gut, that this was only the beginning. The whisper of the scalpel against flesh was the only sound in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker, or so I thought. A sharp intake of breath from behind me snapped my head up. The attendant, a stoic man with eyes that had seen too much and said too little, stood just inside the doorway. He'd been watching me, a silent observer to my grim work. "Anything?" he questioned, his voice raspy like gravel shifting. I shook my head, my gaze returning to the body on the stainless steel table. "Not yet. It's wrong." I couldn't articulate it. The tissue wasn't just unusual. It felt wrong, alien, like I was dissecting a puzzle with pieces that didn't belong. The usual decomposition patterns were absent, replaced by something sterile, almost preserved, yet the skin was taut, as if recently alive. "Wrong how?" the attendant prompted, stepping closer, his own morbid curiosity piqued. "The cellular structure," I began, then stopped. Explaining it would sound like madness. "It's resilient, too resilient, and the coloration, it's not natural." I traced a faint, almost iridescent sheen under the skin with my gloved finger. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years, a phantom memory from my discredited research. The attendant grunted, his gaze fixed on the deceased. "They're all like this, aren't they? The ones they find." "They are," I confirmed, the words heavy with dread. "And that's the problem. This shouldn't be possible with conventional methods." He met my eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Them?" "I don't think," I corrected, my voice hardening. "I know it's them, or at least connected, the Phoenix Project." The name hung in the air, a specter from my past, my own downfall, my own hubris. The attendant paled slightly. "They responded that project was shut down, buried. They say a lot of things," I retorted, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. I needed more samples. This body was a roadmap, and I was only at the first turn. "I need to get this to my old lab. The samples, the scans. They'll be able to analyze it properly." He hesitated. "Your old lab, UserLF, you know they won't let you in there. This isn't just about solving these murders anymore. This is about what I did. The sterile air of the precinct hallway was a stark contrast to the putrid metallic scent I'd grown accustomed to. I walked with a sense of urgency, my mind racing through contingency plans. The precinct chief, a man who'd always treated me with a thinly veiled disdain, would be the first hurdle. He was a sycophant, loyal to whoever held the most power, and my star had fallen long before these murders began. As I approached his office, I saw him conferring with another man, someone I recognized with a jolt of apprehension. The director of research oversight, a man whose very presence reeked of institutional politics and a ruthless desire to maintain the status quo. My former mentor and my ultimate betrayer. I tried to slip past, hoping to avoid their notice, but the director's sharp eyes caught mine. He excused himself from the precinct chief and strode towards me, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum. UserLF, he added, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel. Fancy seeing eye here. These murders are unusual. Unusual is an understatement. The precinct chief chimed in, joining them. He eyed me with suspicion. And the forensic reports are unsettling. We've been advised to proceed with extreme caution and to keep things contained. The director nodded, his gaze never leaving me. Precisely. The scientific community has certain protocols and reputations to protect. We wouldn't want any undue speculation about. They knew this was connected to the Phoenix Project, and they intended to bury it. I understand the need for discretion, Director, but the evidence is mounting. I believe I have a lead, a way to trace these anomalies. And where would you propose to conduct this investigation, UserLF? The Director asked, a subtle challenge in his tone. Your access to any advanced facilities was, as I recall, permanently revoked. The implication was clear. Stay out of it. They wanted this swept under the rug, no matter the cost. My past was catching up to me, not just in the form of these horrific crimes, but in the very people who had helped orchestrate my downfall. I have alternative arrangements, I replied, my voice low. The Director let out a short, humorless laugh. Alternative arrangements? You mean you're going to try and break into your old lab? Or worse, try to replicate our proprietary technologies in some back alley operation? UserLF, I implore you, for your own good, step aside. This is beyond your purview now. Is it? I countered, my resolve hardening. Or is it precisely because of my purview that I'm the only one who can see what's happening? I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the sterile hallway. They could try to stop me, but they didn't understand. I wasn't just investigating murders. I was investigating myself. And I wouldn't rest until I unearthed the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried or who tried to keep it there. My old lab was out. The precinct was out. It was time to go underground. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker was thick with the cloying scent of formaldehyde and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant reminder of where I was and what I was doing. They tried to keep me out, of course. The official channels, the hushed phone calls, the veiled threats, all designed to steer me away from the truth. But they underestimated my stubbornness, my desperate need to prove I wasn't the failure they'd painted me to be. I moved through the rows of stainless steel slabs, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Each gurney was a silent testament to a life cut short, a story left unfinished. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes, making the draped forms seem to shift and writhe. My breath hitched. This was my domain, the place where I'd once excelled before everything fell apart. Now it felt like a tomb, a monument to my own past mistakes. I ran a gloved hand over the cool, smooth surface of a nearby gurney. The previous victim, the architect, had been found here in this very building, but not in this room. That had always been a point of contention. Why bring him down here? The official report said it was for preliminary examination, a hasty assessment before transfer. But the smell, the lingering unease, it suggested something more. My gaze swept over the room, taking in the sterile efficiency of the equipment, the meticulously organized trays of instruments. Everything was in its place, or so it seemed. My eyes landed on a small, unmarked metal cabinet tucked away in a corner, partially obscured by a towering stainless steel trolley. It looked out of place, too utilitarian too. Hidden. A prickle of suspicion, sharp and unwelcome, ran down my spine. I made my way over, the chill of the concrete floor seeping through my thin-soled shoes. The cabinet was locked, a standard tumbler lock, easily bypassed with a few well-placed tools from my kit. I pulled the door open. Inside, it wasn't what I expected. No more vials of preserving fluid, no surgical tools. Instead, it was filled with stacks of old logbooks, their covers faded and worn. And beneath them, a collection of data drives, a jumble of cables, and a single, thick manila folder. My heart gave a strange lurch. This was not standard morgue inventory. I carefully lifted the manila folder. The label, scrawled in what looked like hurried handwriting, simply read, Phoenix Project Specimen 7B. Phoenix Project. The name sent a tremor through me. Rumors of its unethical practices, its pursuit of forbidden knowledge, had circulated for years. I dismissed them as conspiracy theories, the ramblings of the paranoid, until now. I opened the folder. The contents were a mix of handwritten notes, research papers, and what looked like medical scans. The handwriting was erratic, almost frantic, detailing observations and procedures that made my stomach churn. It spoke of genetic manipulation, of attempts to accelerate cellular regeneration, of experiments conducted on living subjects. Specimen 7B. Could this be related to the victims? One of the research papers caught my eye. It was a preliminary report on a new bioagent, codenamed Chimera. The paper described its intended purpose: to enhance human resilience to overcome biological limitations. They detailed horrific side effects, uncontrolled mutations, and a rapid, agonizing decay. The victims hadn't just been murdered, they had been tested. And whatever had been done to them, it was tied to this Phoenix Project, to this Chimera. I sifted through the remaining documents, my hands trembling slightly. There were more specimen logs, each detailing a different subject, a different failed experiment. And then I found a dated entry, just weeks before the architect's death, referencing Subject 7B and a controlled exposure event. The notes described a peculiar set of physical anomalies, mirroring some of the subtle, almost imperceptible details I'd observed on the architect's body during my initial, unofficial examination. The slight discoloration of the skin, unusual rigidity of the joints, I dismissed them as post-mortem artifacts. Now they screamed foul play. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just about murder anymore. This was about a systematic, depraved campaign of human experimentation hidden beneath layers of secrecy and scientific hubris. And the killer wasn't just a killer. They were a product, or perhaps a perpetrator, of this monstrous project. I closed the folder, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to fit, but the picture they formed was terrifying. The motive wasn't personal, it was scientific. A twisted pursuit of progress, a disregard for human life. And somehow my past failures, my disgraced reputation had led me here to the heart of it all. They thought they could bury me. But they were wrong. I was closer than they knew. The name, Phoenix Project, hung in the air, a phantom limb of my past. Disbanded, they said. Forgotten. But the whispers, the hushed, fearful tones, those never really died. I'd heard them, of course, back when I was still a rising star before everything. Unethical practices, forbidden knowledge, the usual grim fairy tales whispered about the fringes of science. It was a motive. Detective Miller watched me, his face a mask of practiced patience. He'd seen me unraveling, I knew. My hands, usually steady as scalpels, had a slight tremor. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room did nothing to hide the strain etched around my eyes. You seem to know something about this Phoenix Project, UserLF. I know the rumors, I answered, my voice rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. It was a black ops initiative, pushing boundaries, they said. Official reports said it was shut down, deemed too volatile. Miller leaned forward. Volatile how? I hesitated. The victims, their disparate lives, their seemingly random connections. Except they weren't random, not if the Phoenix Project was involved. If they were resurfacing, they wouldn't be doing it for nostalgia. They'd be finishing something, or silencing someone. They were experimenting, I finally said, the words feeling heavy, like stones in my mouth. pushing the limits of human potential. Genetic manipulation, advanced neural interfacing. The kind of things that make people uncomfortable, the kind of things that could be weaponized. Miller's gaze sharpened. Weaponized. They might have been loose ends, or perhaps they were test subjects now deemed a liability. I could feel the weight of Miller's scrutiny, but I was beyond caring about his judgment. This was personal now, and now it was back, leaving a trail of bodies in its wake. Who would be behind it now? Miller wondered, his voice low. I closed my eyes, replaying the details of each victim's life, searching for a common thread beyond the project's alleged involvement. The financier, the disgraced politician, the bioengineer, all powerful figures, all with something to hide. And the pathologist who had performed the first autopsy, the one who had been found dead in his own lab a week later. He was the key. He had seen something. The pathologist, I responded, opening my eyes. He was the first to notice the anomalies. He was the one who flagged it to me, indirectly. I know, I stated, the conviction in my voice surprising even myself. They're not just killing randomly, they're eliminating threats, or perhaps they're preparing for something, a final phase. Miller scribbled in his notepad. And who is this they? Someone who has access to the project's resources, someone with intimate knowledge of its research, someone who was there from the beginning, or someone who inherited the burden. My gaze drifted to the file on the table, the autopsy report from the latest victim, the signature at the bottom. A name I hadn't seen in years, a name I thought had been buried along with the project itself. Professor Thorne, I breathed, the name a bitter taste on my tongue. He was the architect of the Phoenix Project. Brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. If he was involved, then this was no mere resurfacing. This was a deliberate, calculated return. Thorne. Miller looked up, his brow furrowed. I thought he was retired, not if he believed it was the next step in human evolution. So, Thorne is our prime suspect. Miller's tone was measured, but I could see the wheels turning. He's more than a suspect, detective. He's the architect. And if he's back, he's not just looking to tie up loose ends. He's looking to finish what he started. I pointed to the autopsy report. Look at the method, the precision. It's Thorne's signature all over again. The same subtle modifications to the cellular structure, the same elegant cruelty. I pushed myself up, the fatigue a dull ache in my bones. We need to move. Thorne won't stop. He'll be anticipating us, but he won't expect us to anticipate him. And where do I think he'll strike next? Miller inquired, his hand hovering over his sidearm. I thought of the victims, their connections, their secrets. Thorne was methodical. He was also theatrical. He wouldn't simply eliminate another potential threat. He would make a statement. The original heart of the Phoenix Project. He'll go there to retrieve whatever is left of his work, and we need to be there waiting. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. The basement morgue, pipes dripping with an incessant, rhythmic pulse, was a place of death. And I, UserLF, was walking right into its embrace. The sterile scent of disinfectant did little to mask the metallic tang of fear clinging to the air in the basement morgue. Pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker. My own sweat beaded on my forehead, a stark contrast to the chill that seeped from the cold slab beneath my fingertips. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, broken only by the maddening drip, drip, drip from the unseen pipes. This was it, the final act. Across the room, bathed in the erratic pulse of the dying lights, stood the perpetrator, the former colleague. Their face was a mask of grim satisfaction, a stark departure from the placid demeanor I'd always known. In their hand, glinting under the unsteady light, was a scalpel. Not just any scalpel, but one identical to the instruments I'd meticulously catalogued in my own disgraced lab. Some doors are meant to stay closed. My gaze flickered to the body on the table. The victim. Another innocent life extinguished. And the method, it was a twisted echo of my own past. The precision, the signature flourish I'd been accused of was undeniable. But I hadn't done this, not this time. This isn't I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. I shifted my weight, my eyes scanning the room, cataloging every detail. The stainless steel trays, the anatomical charts peeling at the edges, the faint smear of what looked like dried blood near the ventilation grate. My mind, even under this immense pressure, began its familiar work. Patterns, deviations, anomalies. The former colleague chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Isn't it, or is it finally the real me unleashed? I taught me so much, UserLF, about the beauty of the human form, about the secrets it holds, secrets the world wasn't ready for. A wave of nausea washed over me. Had I inadvertently set this in motion? Had my own obsessive pursuit of knowledge, my willingness to push boundaries, created this monster? The accusation in the former colleague's eyes, or perhaps the twisted reflection of my own guilt, was almost unbearable. I read twisting what I believed in, I countered, taking a slow, deliberate step back, my hand subtly reaching for the heavy-duty flashlight I'd placed on a nearby trolley. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was something. Science is about understanding, not destruction. And what did they do to I, UserLF? The former colleague took a step forward, the scalpel now held loosely, as if it were an extension of their hand. They cast I out, labeled I a failure, they buried my discoveries. But I learned, I adapted, I found a way to make them listen. My mind raced, the smear near the vent. It was too high for a struggle, more like a hurried wiping motion perhaps after something had been secreted. And the victim's body, the peculiar stillness, almost too perfect. I'd noticed it the moment I'd entered. It wasn't the stillness of death, it was the stillness of being prepared. I think this is about revenge, I asked, my voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. I think this is about proving them wrong. This is madness. Madness is letting ignorance prevail. The former colleague spat, their eyes narrowing. In that brief blackout, I heard a faint scuffing sound. When the light returned, the former colleague was closer. Too close. The scalpel was now raised. My instincts screamed. I lunged, not towards them, but towards the trolley. My fingers fumbled for the flashlight, my thumb hitting the switch. A blinding beam of light cut through the gloom, catching the former colleague square in the eyes. They recoiled, a guttural cry escaping their lips. The scalpel clattered against the tiled floor. It was a small victory, but it bought me precious seconds. I didn't hesitate. I spun, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy metal tray, and swung it, not to injure, but to create distance, to disrupt their balance. The former colleague stumbled back, their eyes watering. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath their lab coat, peeking out from their waistband, was a small, intricate device. It looked like a modified atomizer. It wasn't the scalpel, was it? I breathed, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying finality, the perfect stillness of the victim. The subtle, almost imperceptible discoloration of their skin, the lack of any external trauma. It was the air. I poisoned them, and the scalpel. It was a diversion, a theatrical flourish. The former colleague's face contorted, a mixture of rage and something akin to despair. I always were too clever for my own good, UserLF. But I wasn't clever enough, not yet. The device. It was still in their hand. And the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker, was a sealed environment. The air in the basement morgue, pipes dripping, fluorescent flicker was thick with the metallic tang of something I couldn't quite place, something beyond the usual sterile order of death. It coated my tongue, a bitter reminder of how close I'd come to being another specimen under the harsh lights. The device, still clutched in the assailant's limp hand, felt like a lead weight in mine. It was a crude thing, a cobbled-together mess of wires and circuits that looked more like a student project gone wrong than a murder weapon. Yet it had been used, and I had walked right into the trap. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the oppressive silence. The assailant lay sprawled on the cold, tiled floor, eyes wide and unseeing, staring up at the buzzing, unreliable lights. The name echoed in my head, a ghost from a past I tried so desperately to bury. They'd brought me back for this, for a ghost to rise from the ashes of my own disgrace. And now the ashes were stirring, threatening to consume me all over again. I knelt, my knees protesting against the unforgiving tile. My gloved fingers traced the edges of the device. It was designed to disrupt, to overload. Not to kill, not directly, but the residual energy. That could be lethal, especially to someone already weakened. Anomalous readings, equipment failures, all dismissed as user error, faulty wiring, all pointing back to this. This wasn't just about solving a series of murders. This was about confronting the architects of my downfall. The ones who had twisted my research, my passion, into something monstrous. The ones who had sacrificed lives for their twisted vision of progress. I pushed myself up, my muscles stiff and sore. The security detail, a grim-faced team I barely recognized, were already swarming the entrance, their movements efficient and practiced. They'd found me, or rather, they'd found the aftermath. My confrontation, my near-fatal mistake, had served its purpose, albeit a terrifyingly unintended one. The lead investigator, a sharp-featured woman with eyes that missed nothing, approached me cautiously. "UserLF, are you all right?" Her voice was a low rumble, devoid of any emotion. I managed a curt nod, my gaze fixed on the assailant. "I will be. What do you know about the Phoenix Project?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. She paused, her expression unreadable. "It's a legacy project, highly classified. We're still piecing together its scope." She avoided my eyes, a telltale sign. They knew more than they were letting on. They always did. "Legacy project," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. It was my life's work, twisted and corrupted. I gestured to the device. "This is the result. This is what happens when you play God with science." The investigator's jaw tightened. "We understand your involvement, UserLF, but right now we need to focus on the facts. The assailant is deceased. Cause of death appears to be a catastrophic electrical surge, consistent with the device." Consistent, not definitive. They were still hedging, still protecting their secrets. I felt a surge of frustration, hot and sharp, but I tamped it down. This was no time for outbursts. This was the time for precision. It was singed around the edges, another testament to the surge. But there was something else, a faint, almost imperceptible scent clinging to it. Not ozone, not burnt plastic. Something organic, a floral note, strangely out of place in this sterile environment. My mind raced, sifting through fragments of memory, scientific journals, forgotten experiments. The Phoenix Project wasn't just about energy. It was about biointegration, about enhancing human capabilities through controlled electrical stimulation. They had been trying to bridge the gap between man and machine, a dangerous frontier. And this assailant, they weren't just a victim of their own weapon. They were a product. I turned to the investigator. This person, were they identified? Not yet. No identification on them. They were wearing a standard issue jumpsuit, nothing else. A standard issue jumpsuit. But the scent, it was too personal, too distinct. It was a detail that didn't fit the sterile narrative they were weaving. Time I was running out of. The Phoenix Project had created monsters, something acrid like burnt plastic. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant, unwelcome reminder of why I was here. The standard issue jumpsuit lay on the stainless steel examination table, a stark white against the grim surroundings. It was the scent, though. That was the hook. Not the usual antiseptic smell of the morgue, but a specific, almost floral detergent laced with a faint trace of ozone. I'd smelled it before, not on a victim, not on a suspect. On myself years ago after a particularly unpleasant incident in my old lab. My gaze drifted from the jumpsuit to the network of pipes overhead, their metallic groans a discordant symphony with the rhythmic drip, drip, drip. Each falling droplet seemed to echo the beat of my own heart, a steady, insistent rhythm that was both reassuring and unnerving. The flickering fluorescent tubes above cast erratic shadows, making the already unsettling space feel alive, breathing. I ran a hand over the rough fabric of my own borrowed lab coat, the coarse weave a familiar sensation. The assailant. They'd been meticulous, leaving behind a carefully constructed tableau of normalcy. A staged scene, designed to point fingers in the wrong direction, to obscure the truth with a convenient lie. But they'd overlooked one small detail, a detail that spoke of a personal touch, a signature woven into the very fabric of the crime. It was a thread, thin but strong, pulling me towards the real story. I knelt beside the jumpsuit, my fingers tracing the faint outline of a stain near the collar. Not blood, something oily. And that scent again, stronger now. It wasn't just detergent. It was a specific brand, one I'd used exclusively for cleaning sensitive equipment. The kind that left no residue, that evaporated without a trace. Except, apparently, not entirely. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory, discarded theories, and the unsettling echoes of my own past mistakes. The way the victims had been modified, the precision of the incisions, the strange chemical compounds I'd detected in earlier autopsies. It wasn't the work of a madman or a desperate criminal. It was the work of someone with intimate knowledge of my field, someone who understood the delicate dance between science and its darker applications. A low hum emanated from the far end of the room, near a bank of old, humming freezers. I stood, my joints protesting the movement, and walked towards the source of the noise. The truth, I was beginning to realize, wasn't a sudden flash of lightning. It was more like the slow, inexorable creep of a rising tide. Each clue, each observation, was another wave lapping at the shore of my understanding, gradually revealing the hidden landscape beneath. I stopped in front of one of the larger freezers. The label, a faded piece of tape, simply read, Samples Project Chimera. Chimera. It was the project I'd been forced to abandon, the one that had cost me everything, the one they tried to bury. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I took a deep breath, the acrid scent filling my lungs. This was it, the final piece, the culmination of a nightmare that had haunted me for years. The latch clicked open with a sharp, decisive sound that seemed to cut through the ambient drone. I pulled the heavy door open, the rush of frigid air hitting my face like a physical blow. Inside, neatly arranged, were rows upon rows of vials, each containing a viscous, amber liquid. And on the shelf, tucked away in the back, was a small, leather-bound journal, my journal, the one I thought had been destroyed. My fingers brushed against the worn cover, a jolt of recognition coursing through me. It was all here. The notes, the experiments, the ethical compromises I'd made in my youthful ambition, and more importantly, the evidence of what they had done with it. The stolen research, the twisted applications, the lives that had been ruined or extinguished in their pursuit of. What? Progress. Power. A faint smile touched my lips, a weary acknowledgement of the long, arduous journey. The resolution wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about ensuring that the truth, however ugly, would finally see the light of day. The scent of ozone and floral detergent faded, replaced by the crisp, sterile air of revelation. The pipes still dripped, but now each drop sounded like a promise of accountability, a promise of a future where science served humanity, not its own insatiable hunger. But my work in the world, the real work, was just beginning.